landing a great job opportunity is sometimes very challenging. Breaking into tech and getting hired as a sales rep can be even harder. When I was applying to my first sales jobs, I also struggled with the unknown. What to expect, what the tech industry was like, and how do I break in? After years of being an SDR myself, I've decided to build something I wish I had in the beginning. My name is Dashlane, and in the SDR Hire podcast, I interview successful SDRs and salespeople who share their stories straight from the trenches. Learn how they got their first job offers, how they succeed every day in their roles, and what makes them stand out in their organizations. We all have what it takes. We just need someone to remind us of the opportunity and give us a better chance for success. Let's get your next SDR gig. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the SDR Hire podcast. My guest today is James Fox, an account executive at a company called Dashlane. James just recently got promoted to the AE position after a very successful run as an SDR. And what's even more impressive is the fact that the promotion came after just 8 months in the SDR role, before which James didn't even know what an SDR was. More about his story, Dashlane, and how he broke into the tech industry after a career completely outside of it, we'll get to hear from James himself. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Happy to be here.
Yeah, awesome to have you. And like I mentioned, I've been very jealous of our previous conversation. I wish it was filmed for the podcast. But anyway, let's just kick things off with what did your transition into tech look like and what made you switch to being an SDR in specific?
Yeah, so not to go too far back, but my brother, we all even go back further. So my family has always been kind of a family of entrepreneurs, very sales heavy, obviously, really kind of put themselves out there. And I've always been a little envious of that because that's not really what my personality was. And then fast forward a little bit, I have 2 older brothers, but my middle brother, Matt, he's been in sales for quite some time and outbound B2B sales. And he's always tried to convince me to get into it. Just do it. I like to think I was a little bit more calculated and I was a little more risk averse. And I think that role to me always screamed like inconsistency and a lot of peaks and valleys. And it scared me a little bit, to be honest. So I never really, I couldn't pull myself together to just kind of jump ship. So I was an operations manager and area manager in the fitness industry for 10, 11 years, went into banking, retail banking. And that's what my previous role was before getting into an SDR role. So still a lot of professional experience. I dealt with people every day. I managed people for a long time as well, but all customer facing type roles. So talking to people wasn't a problem. And quite often, a lot of times I talked to people, they weren't very happy. So dealing with those type of conversations was over time very easy. So I decided, I'm getting a little older. It's still a little nerve-wracking to change industries and a career completely, but I saw something, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I heard something about SDR, maybe probably on my LinkedIn feed somewhere. I'm like, what is that? I don't know what that is. So I looked a little bit into that. I'm like, oh, that sounds easy enough. Just call people and book meetings. Like, sure. Little did I know at that time, but yeah. So I just started researching a little bit more. I started listening to podcasts, which was interesting because there's really no context for me there other than sales and sales. So yeah, so that's really kind of where I started getting my first initial taste of what that could look like. And then I just started applying to SDR jobs and started getting a couple interviews. That didn't go very well. Naturally, I think guys don't know what I'm talking about. What's a tech stack? What does that mean? Like what? I have a computer. Does that count? Yeah. So just stuff like that. But again, it took a couple interviews to start understanding what questions that I'm probably going to be asked, a lot of Google searches, start following people on LinkedIn that are in the space, whether that's AEs or SDRs. And you can you make all that into a nice big snowball of your own. And then you get better, hopefully anyways. So,
right.
Yeah, that's kind of what that looks like. Yeah.
Nice. It sounds like you eventually had a pretty structured approach to actually getting hired. And speaking of which, you got hired by Dashlane. Can you tell us a bit more about the company?
Yeah. So real simply, we make password security and password management easy for everybody. So we do have a consumer side and a B2B side. I'm an outbound AE now on the B2B side. So we started out as a consumer product. So we're very customer end user focused. So our ease of use is a big point of our solution. If it's not easy to use, nobody's going to use it. But we're keeping companies and individuals secure by making sure that their password hygiene is where it needs to be. So that's what we do.
Nice. I'm curious to understand, what was the interview process like at Dashlane? Did you approach them or did somebody approach you? Like, how did that process look like?
Yeah, so I applied like anybody else would, which for anybody listening or watching, don't fall into the abyss of applying and just hoping to get a call back. I was very fortunate, and I would definitely approach things differently now knowing what I know, but I did just apply, and lucky enough I got a phone call back. And so I got a call from an internal recruiter from Dashlane. I had a great conversation, I felt anyways, really liked the guy. And so they moved me on to the next stage, which was a call with my then boss, the SDR manager. Things went well there. And then we scheduled another call, which was a mock cold call, and they asked me to prepare a cold email for them as well. So knowing my backstory and what you just found out, that was a little, at that point I hadn't listened to enough podcasts, I think. I'm like, okay, I think I might be able to get a cold email set up. But he said, pick anybody you want, somebody that you think would be a target for us, and just write up an email for them. Nice. Like, okay. So I did all that. We had our mock call, showed them the email, and I obviously thought it was really decent enough to move me on. So then I had a call with the head of sales, and then just with another AE, both on the same day as well. It was nice. It felt a little bit more informal, just to kind of like, hey, this is somebody that we want to work with. Do we like this guy? And then the one more conversation with the recruiter, the internal recruiter, for more of a job offer conversation. So I think it was probably a week and a half, maybe max 2 weeks, which is great.
Awesome. Yeah.
Those ones that get drug on, I think a lot of people lose opportunity to other companies because of that.
Exactly. Good for Dashlane.
100%. It was an enjoyable experience. Everybody was awesome, and that was a big reason why I did have one other offer on the table as well. And I went with Dashlane because everybody I spoke to was really great. And those are people that I wanted to be around.
Perfect. I'm glad that you mentioned also the assessment part of the interview process as well, because, SDR role is basically, it comes down to writing cold emails and doing cold calls. So especially considering that you were able to land an offer in just like 10 days or so, it seems like your previous experience really did come through, and also the materials that you were going through during your preparation process.
Yeah, it's lucky I dealt with people every day, so I try to just be as natural in myself as possible. And if somebody doesn't want me, then I feel okay with that. That's okay. I'm not trying to fake anything for anybody. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a healthy way of thinking about the culture of a company you would join. Speaking of being an SDR, what was it like being an SDR at Dashlane?
So get hired on, got a couple of weeks of product training and going through just the different departments in the company, doing a lot of one-on-ones with different folks, different departments, to get a sense of how we're set up as an organization. And then from there, we did a lot of cold calling, mock calls with different folks, make sure that we just get that muscle memory going with those type of calls. But I'm a big believer that you don't really know what it's like until you get onto live calls, because every prospect is different, every person is different, every conversation is different. So mock calls are great just to kind of get some of those responses, more like muscle memory, but nothing beats jumping on the phone. So I'll shout out to Gong. I love Gong. Gong was a tremendous help in me listening to what real cold calls sound like. That was great. That accelerated my learning very quickly, I think. So shout out to the Gong or any companies like them. But if you don't have them, use them. So that was a huge step for me to be able to listen to all those calls and listen to AE calls and look at the demos and just understand a little bit about what our prospect sounds like when they're talking about their pains and what they're talking about their day to day, right? But yeah, so training was good. It wasn't like very regimented, which for me personally, I prefer. I'm not super organized. Hopefully nobody is listening that would care about that. But yeah, so something like really by the book regimen training would be okay. But I think for my personality, just go do it and go learn. Go fail and fail fast, fail quickly, and then learn, right? So yeah, it was nothing too complicated to speak about around that.
And so it sounds again like you approached this process in a very structured way and a very thorough way, similar to how you did to the hiring process. So having something like Gong in your tech stack, and here we go, here's the tech stack again.
Yeah, right.
is
100%.
very useful.
100%. Yeah, I think taking a step back, I'm not a very process-oriented person, but when you say it, I take a step back. Okay, I learn from other people, and if I can have resources available to me to see how it's done and then be able to kind of shape it in the way that I feel works best for my style, I think is probably the best way to go about it. I tell other SDRs that now work for us, look, do it the way that you want to do it. Don't throw out the handbook. Operate within a framework that you're given, but like really understand what works best for you, and then start building on that. Because they can't do everything the way that I did it. They go listen to all my Gong calls and they could do exactly what I did. And it just may not work. Even though I had success with it, it doesn't matter. So take bits and pieces from everybody and then just do what works for you.
For sure. Find your own voice, SDR voice. Oh, I love it. Like, have you faced any obstacles when you entered the SDR role, or was it just like a smooth ride to the AE promotion?
Oh man, I was very fortunate to have success on the phones from the first week I was on the phones all the way up until getting my promotion. That's not to say that it was like easy, right? I know it was stressful, anxiety filled a little bit. It's just, but it's part of the job, right? This is my work.
Right.
So there's really I enjoyed every bit of it. I love it. I still enjoy it. Matter of fact, I love cold calling. I know people will say, Wes, you may not love cold calling, but you don't mind it. You know what? I really do kind of enjoy it. I think it's fun, kind of making a game out of it, but also really truly helping people too. I think is helping these people and helping these companies become more secure, which is super fun as well. But yeah, I mean, obstacles, just managing my own emotions, quite honestly, is probably a pretty big deal. And I would tell that to any SDR. You got to just try to keep those in check a little bit, because when you start getting desperate for meetings, that's definitely going to come through on the phones. And you'll hear any thought leader on LinkedIn or anybody that's in sales talk about those type of feelings. And those come through the phone quite regularly if that's the level you're on. And then meetings, people showing up to meetings. That was probably one of my biggest anxiety filled moments every day when I had meetings scheduled. Are they going to show up for the AE or not? And figuring out the process and making sure that those people show up. So I think just managing the emotions of those two things, really important for your just daily sanity, quite honestly. Yeah.
Awesome. I mean, listening to you right now, and even in the initial conversations that we've had, I would have never guessed that you've been an SDR for such a short amount of time, like 8 months, and then just transitioning into the new role. But what have you been doing that has helped you progress so fast and helped you upskill yourself?
Yeah, I think we mentioned a little bit earlier about podcasts and LinkedIn. I think podcasts were a big part of just understanding like the general idea of like what it is that SDRs and even AEs do, right? Because there's not a ton of SDR podcasts out there, which this is great, by the way. I think there should be more. And so listening to those folks, and then you go follow those people on LinkedIn, right? And then they're talking about those things, and then they're liking posts and sharing posts of other people in the business as well. So I have a feed full of stuff that I can just take in every single day. So it's just a constant learning process of every day, taking in and consuming content from these folks and podcasts. And then from that point, again, really trying to take bits and pieces that you feel that could apply to what you do every day, and then use it. I can't tell you how many my cold call openers and all that are plagiarized from everybody on LinkedIn. It's not just one. I take all of it and kind of form it into something that maybe flows off my mouth a little bit better. It's like, okay, that makes sense for me. But yeah, it's very fortunate to have those type of resources available to us, and so quickly too. But you got to apply it and not be afraid to apply those things too, because I know cold calling can be a little bit daunting, and calling strangers, depending on who you're calling on. I think some personas probably are a little bit easier or a little bit harder, but at the end of the day, you still have, what do they say, 7 seconds to earn somebody's trust and open up a little bit. So it is tough, very tough, but it's a podcast. I'm not much of a reader. I wish I could tell you I read 1,000 books. I probably should read more, but that may be my next step. But for now, I'm sticking to the podcast. I can do that while I'm working out. Easy.
For sure. I think that this goes back to what you mentioned previously, which is finding your own voice as an SDR. I think that entails cold calls especially. And another thing that I want to emphasize from what you've said is having all those resources available for taking on LinkedIn. Like, you don't have to pay for anything. You can just log in, literally have your feed filled with examples and good practices, cold calls, cold emails, campaigning, prospecting, so many thought leaders, so many folks sharing their knowledge for free. So I would definitely recommend everybody to just jump on the LinkedIn train.
Have to. I think it's imperative, whether you're an experienced AE and SDR, or if you're so many people now trying to break into tech, SaaS sales. I'd love to see it though. It's really great. And I'm trying to help them out as many people as I can. Now, I haven't been in the game that long, but I'll try to offer up anything that I can to anybody that wants help.
That's so cool. I have a question for that as well. But before we jump into that part, I'm just curious. So you were an SDR, you got promoted. How did your perspective change once you stepped into the AE role? So is it different filling your own pipeline versus the pipeline of another AE? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, it is different. And it's funny, I almost feel guilty might be a little bit of a strong word, but I will tell you, so as an SDR, obviously our goal is to get somebody on the phone, generate some interest if we can. On cold outbound, that is, in my opinion, one of the hardest things to do, especially if you don't have enough of a reputation out there that people don't know who you are, which is pretty common for us right now. Even though we've been around for a while, again, we were a B2C company for 9 or 10 years before we even got to the B2B space. So yeah, it's tough. Now calling as an AE to put meetings on my calendar, I do have the luxury of qualifying just a bit more without booking a meeting, because that's okay. Because if they're not, like, I can take a couple of 2 or 3 more questions than I typically would as an SDR. Say, oh, you know what, maybe this isn't the right fit. So I'm not going to throw 20 to 30 minutes on my calendar because we're just not going to work. Whereas as an SDR, I might go in for the meeting ask and be like, yeah, it sounds like we could maybe mutually benefit from each other. Let's chat again. So I think that's probably one of the biggest differences. And if for any reason my other AEs that I book meetings for or happen to come across, it's like, look, I promise I was putting meetings on your calendar that I thought were good. And most of them were pretty good, but yeah, I think that's probably the biggest difference. And the second one, honestly, is there's a little bit less stress about booking the meeting itself, obviously, right? Because I don't have to be held to a meeting held quota any longer.
Yep.
Now, those meetings do generate revenue, so I do need meetings on my calendar to generate revenue. But the meeting itself, like, there's not that pressure to book and book and book and then show up, please show up. So those feelings are kind of gone for now. Now that might change in a little while, and there's a great sense of ownership for right now, basically being full cycle, right? I think it's super fun. I still like to practice by cold calling. I still enjoy that process. But now the setting a meeting, then running that meeting, and then possibly closing a deal because I sourced it from completely cold outbound. I haven't done it yet. I haven't closed anything yet, everybody. But like when it does happen, I know it's going to be quite a great feeling. So yeah, that's probably the 2 biggest differences, quite honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm just curious regarding your guys' process. Are you still getting meetings from your fellow SDRs, or are you just solely focused on your own pipeline and that's it?
Yeah, right now it's just our own pipeline. We will be getting, me and another senior SDR were promoted to AE. So we will be getting into the round robin. I'm not sure exactly when. I think for now, we're just filling our own funnel and run those meetings, get some reps under our belt while we ramp up. So yeah, whenever that happens, great. I'll be super pumped to get the meetings on my books that I didn't have to do any work for. But for now, I think I'm okay with where we're at. True prospecting, building lists, getting a little bit more narrow focused on the personas that I'm calling on, and taking a little bit more ownership. It's fun.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I guess it comes down to that sense of ownership and it's just you. I always like to make comparisons with SDRs, with entrepreneurs, right? Especially full cycle, for example, AE, like you own everything, like from sourcing to closing, and nobody's gonna give you the salary if you don't close. It's a similar deal to an AE who's just, you gotta source, you gotta close it to get the bonus. So I think that's a cool way of looking at things. So you've got a perspective from an SDR standpoint, you've got a perspective from an AE standpoint. So what would you recommend to somebody trying to land an SDR gig, other than the things you mentioned?
For sure. Yeah, I think the biggest piece of advice I give anybody right now that is trying to break in is, you may not have the connections yet. So if you do have to kind of go the route of applying for jobs, but definitely find the jobs on LinkedIn. I think that's the best source of places to go find it. So whether it be through actual job postings, or if you start seeing people posting about, hey, we're hiring SDRs, we're hiring AEs, whatever it may be, do definitely apply. But then you have to reach out to whoever posted the job on LinkedIn, or whoever the SDR manager is, or the recruiter, whomever it is. And then again, we're SDRs, or you want to be an SDR, so you be a little resourceful. But typically, if they're using LinkedIn, you can go to the business page, you can find who the recruiter is, or find out who the SDR manager is. That's pretty easy. But send them a video, introduce yourself. Hands down, 100%. always do it. Vidyard, BombBomb, I think is another one. Like those two are probably the two best that I'm aware of. But send that hiring manager or recruiter a video. This is not like a video resume. Keep it short, 30 seconds, 45 seconds. Hey, that's James. Wanted to put a name to the face. I just applied for this SDR role. Wanted to introduce myself. I really look forward to talking to you here in the near future. But hey, appreciate it. Have a great day. But again, like nobody's doing it. If there's 100 applications, if maybe those hiring managers are getting a couple personalized notes, they might get a video now. It's generating maybe a little bit more conversation out there right now, but nobody's doing it. So if you want to be moved to the top of the stack to at least get an interview, you need to do that.
Yeah.
Big believer in that. So,
Oh, yeah.
and then outside of that, take some time to, I hate to say, do your research on, listen to those podcasts or read the books or follow the appropriate people on LinkedIn. But if you haven't been in the business before, just understanding how they talk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I mentioned tech stack earlier when I first initial interviewed. I didn't know what that was. Like, what's that mean? So I Googled, what's a tech stack? Oh, that's easy. Duh. But, what's outreach? I don't know what outreach is. What's Gong?
Mm-hmm.
What's Sales Loft? And what does this software do? So if you can jump on an interview and say, yeah, I'm familiar with Gong and Salesforce and outreach and sequences and that's another thing too that blew my mind. Email sequences. Oh my God. I want to get into, I could talk a whole nother hour about outreach and how that has made my life significantly better as an SDR. Shout out to them too. But yeah, so 14 step or 21 touch, 14 days or whatever it is, like those, it blew my mind. Like, what do you mean? Wait, hold on a minute. You tell me that you have a program that takes you through 21 days and 14 touches of one person? It's crazy to me. But now, yeah, that's absolutely true because I booked plenty of meetings on my 21st day, my 14th touch. Yep. And it blows my mind. They haven't seen any of my emails. They haven't heard any, if I did leave any voicemails, they haven't heard them. They don't know who we are. But I'm at the end of my sequence and I'm booking meetings for them. It's just like why anybody would stop going through the end of those longer sequences blows my mind. But like that kind of thing. To understand what that means, what it looks like, I think is a great benefit to anybody trying to get into the game too. Sorry, I could talk about this for all day. So
yeah, I know I'm passionate about all that as well myself, and that's actually why I started this project in the first place. And what I would kind of use to describe the summary of what you just said is just do the research, go the extra mile, do the video, and just understand the ecosystem, understand what you're applying for. So if you want to be an SDR and you want to talk technology, you just have to understand at least to an extent what's going on, who you're talking with, what are their expectations, and what you can emphasize to put yourself at the top of the stack. Awesome. This was very insightful, hopefully to our listeners as well. And so you did sound like you were talking from experience when you mentioned videos. Have you done any video interviews or rather sent videos for interviews or?
I did not. I didn't know enough about it to do it. When I mentioned earlier, if I could go back in time and change my process of how I applied for jobs, it would look completely different today. So again, I'm obviously very happy where I'm at. I wouldn't change anything, but if I had to go back and have the knowledge, like 100%, it would be approached a little bit differently. But yeah, my wife was able to, I'd like to think, secure a job by getting kind of moved up to the top of a stack of applicants with using a video introduction of herself. Because so many people referenced the video after she got hired. They all talked about it. Hey, we all saw your video. We saw your video. Oh, we saw your video. Like people watched it, right? So it does help. And she had no experience in a SaaS tech company either. And she got hired on over at PandaDoc. So like super pumped about that too. She may not be as much because I'm in the space too. So now she's got to hear me talk about it all the time. But hopefully now it makes more sense to her. Like, oh yeah, I get it now. Yeah.
Just another common topic for the two of you. Awesome. I'd say that kind of brings us to the end of at least the questions that I've had so far. But before I let you go, is there anything you'd add as a, I guess, summary for our listeners in general that are trying to break into tech or are trying to land their next SDR job?
Yeah, just do it. Just dive in. Like, man, if I could, I don't regret anything, but if I not only go back to the beginning of this process, but if I could go back 10, 15 years and have started this process and not be so as scared at what could have been or what maybe would have worked out, I can't imagine. I'd like to think that would be progressed a little bit further where I am currently today, but like, man, so yeah, just jump into it, ask for help. There's so many people out there that want to help. that are full of knowledge that can assist. And again, and if you don't want to ask anybody, there's plenty of, like we've mentioned, free resources out there, podcasts. Just taking that LinkedIn data all day. There's plenty of books too. Again, I need to read more, but yeah, so just do it. Don't be scared. Be yourself. Don't try to make yourself into the type of like salesperson that people think you should be. I think being genuine obviously comes across a lot better. That's easier said than done though. It's always tough. I have a major problem with imposter syndrome, so I don't feel like I belong. I still don't feel like I belong. And I think that's what kind of drove me every day to continue to try to be better. But even so, like some days you feel completely lost and some days feel a little bit better than others, but just relax. It's not the end of the world. Just do the work, be yourself.
Right.
Simple enough, right?
It does sound simple after a while, but at the beginning it does have its obstacles and insecurities come forth, and the imposter syndrome. Like we could probably talk a couple of hours about that.
Oh yeah,
for sure. I mean, myself here as well. It never went away. Actually, like even this now, it's. But anyway, James, I appreciate it very much for you for jumping on the show, sharing your story and your experience. I'm going to leave your contact and the website and all of that stuff underneath, so folks can reach out if they'd like. And it's been a blast. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. And anybody that wants to reach out, don't hesitate. Like I'm an open book. Come find me, LinkedIn, email, whatever it is. Yeah, definitely reach out.
Great. Thanks, James.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the SDR Hire podcast, the only podcast exclusively focused on SDRs, where successful salespeople share about their hiring stories and sales adventures straight from the trenches. If you found this useful, go ahead and share it with someone else you know is trying to break into tech or land their next SDR gig. You can find SDR Hire on all major podcast platforms as well as YouTube. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and catch you in the next episode.